Hello, Paul. Welcome to this exciting conversation about embedding coaching in an FE context. I'm really grateful for you making some time today to talk to me about this really interesting topic. So do you want to introduce yourself first of all?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Thanks for inviting me on this opportunity to chat about my passion, one of my passions in teaching and learning. And yeah, I'm Paul Banthorpe, and I've been teaching in mostly the FE sector, but tapping into the HE field as well for nearly 30 years now. So doesn't time fly when you're having fun? But yeah, at the moment, my present role, I'm Director of Teacher Development Training based at East Surrey College, which is near Redhill. Or in Redhill actually, but we're a college group. We've got other sort of satellite colleges that we work with as well, including John Ruskin College in Selsdon. Some of you might know that in South London. Yeah, so happy to be here, talking about everything sort of coaching and sharing some of my experiences, particularly the last 15 years.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm Joanne Miles and I'm a teacher and a trainer and a coach in the FE sector. And we've met at various development events, and I've also done bits of training for you, some CPD for teachers, I recall, at one of the sites where you've worked, and also a little bit of work with your coaching team as well for development for them.
Yes, so, yeah, we've crossed paths several times, and you know, it's been hopefully a fruitful relationship in that time.
Exactly, and always great to chat coaching together.
It is, yeah, and coaching is a journey, and we're still on that journey.
Absolutely, and I think we both have that in common, so I'm really pleased that we can be here to talk about that in more depth. So starting off, thinking about how you actually developed yourself, where you started, what brought you to coaching in the first place then?
Seems like a lifetime ago now, but actually the first time I was really introduced to the concept of coaching in terms of teacher development was part of the subject learning coaches rollout, which was about 2005, 2006. I think I was in the first guinea pig cohort. Most of the sessions were held in London. People might remember the wonderful standards unit box sets that were produced with the wonderful resources for maths and business studies and constructions and things like that. And that's what we took back to the colleges to try and entice teachers into sort of a new way of professional development, which was peer-to-peer coaching, coming alongside another professional and talking about practice and how these resources, they could embed these resources or adapt these resources into their teaching practice. So that was my first introduction to coaching about 17 years ago now.
And those national programs, I mean, lots of things have been run. There's been AP Connect recently from the Education and Training Foundation. And I know that subject learning coaches, a lot of people started there. I think some of these national programs are a really good starting point. They're like a springboard for people, aren't they?
They are. They're a big stepping stone, huge stepping stone into the world of coaching and mentoring.
And free resources to adapt, always welcome. So how did you go further and develop? I think it's about both knowledge and skills, because I think as coaches, it's both of those areas that we need to work on.
It is, and like most coaches, maybe the 90s, as an advanced practitioner, I was an advanced practitioner then. It was trial and error. It wasn't quite sure what I was doing. I was sort of playing around a little bit with concepts and models and conversation techniques, and some worked and some didn't work. But every conversation I thought was valuable. With every teacher I worked with, there was always some value from it, and I've rarely come away from a coaching conversation thinking that was a waste of time. So yeah, and I think it because it's a skill, it's a knowledge, you work on it. We'll come on to that a bit later, I think. But in terms of formalizing that practice, obviously things developed in the sector. People developing new resources, new peer-to-peer coaching and mentoring techniques. I certainly bought into sort of the How to Teach program. And the resources that included, which was all the little cards and little infographics that teachers could use and share in practice. And that was a really healthy resource to have at the time. And I think the first time we met was when you were promoting your concept of supported experiments in the sector. And I felt that was really refreshing, because it meant we could experiment in the classroom in our practice. It didn't matter that we got things wrong. And coaching is all about encouraging fellow professionals to have a go at something, to try something new, try something different, get out of the rut of teaching and of your practice, of your methods. Try something new, something creative. If it doesn't quite work, it doesn't matter, because you've learned from the experience. And I think that was a big eye-opener as well, Joe.
Let's go back a little bit to the how to teach, just to give people a little bit more detail on that. I mean, I know this is about visual representations of classroom methods. I know there are some fantastic resources developed by, I think, Ian Harris, Oliver Cavaglioli's been
That's right,
involved.
yes.
Visuals that show us evidence-based techniques, but broken down into the steps that teachers might follow. How have you found those useful in working with teachers at this point and subsequently?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, we used the resources over a 3-year period. And there was some online activities that teachers could do, and they took those online tasks and activities into practice. It was a big reflective process, but I think that the cards, what I call infographics, and I love infographics, showing that scaffolded step-by-step approach to teaching. If you do this, this is the next step. A lot of formative assessment stuff from the creators of How to Teach, and a lot of how to embed technology at the time, which a lot of teachers, it was completely new, sort of, 15 years ago, 12, 15 years ago, completely new, how to embed technology into the classroom. And that was a real step-by-step approach.
I think it's interesting that that step-by-step approach now, if we think about instructional coaching, which is a technique set that people are talking about a lot, there's actually a really strong fit with some of the resources like the How to Teach suite into using instructional techniques with teachers, so that you're really helping them break down the stages of how to do something in the classroom as part of that conversation. And I think an important point there maybe is that it's not about imposing a technique on a teacher, it's about a need emerging in the conversation and then signposting these resources for people so that they can explore maybe a new way of doing a group work activity or running a plenary, for example.
Yeah. One of the mantras in coaching mentoring is adopt and adapt, isn't it? Make it fit your reality of your students and your subject area. And coaching has helped us move away from this one-size-fits-all approach to CPD and professional development. It's very differentiated, and it comes down to the individual teacher in their learning environment with their group of students and what works best.
Exactly.
So no two conversations are the same, and that's what makes it interesting.
Exactly. And that feeling that it's about the teacher owning it and developing their thinking and their choices and their planning techniques, as opposed to saying, here are the 5 things that we think are the hot methods at the moment. Can you shoehorn these into your practice? I think that change in thinking has really liberated people, and that coaches are part of those conversations in a really, really massive way in colleges. What about qualifications? Because I think it's interesting to think about trial and error as one way of learning about coaching, but the role also of qualifications, I think, is fundamental in developing practice.
It is, and there's more qualifications that come in. Obviously, the ILM suite of coaching qualifications has been a big springboard for a lot of people over the last 5 years or so. So I started with the subject learning coaches. That's a level 5, and I look back at that and think that was a lot of hard work at level 5, and that was a big jump into the world of coaching from that really quite academic, conceptual portfolio of evidence we had to put together. But more recently, I've been looking at level 7. I've completed my level 7 executive coaching. That's sort of my next sort of springboard into practice, if you like. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I think qualifications are important. They do give you that sense of credibility. And I think leadership and management do like that. They say, is a coaching qualification. I'm actually a legitimate coach. This is not something I'm playing around with. I've had training. I've been recognised in my practice. And here's the piece of paper or certificate that goes alongside that. It never hurts.
I'm totally with you. It's a professionalizing, it's a formalizing thinking, and it's also bringing theory, models, a wider perspective, I think, into our work. I know I'd started with level 5 ILM, and at that point it was quite a lot of theory. It was a portfolio around different coaching interventions that you'd made, reflecting on what your coachee feedback was, identifying your own areas of improvement. It was actually really rigorous, quite thought-provoking. I learned a lot. My skill set at that point really developed through that. So I think it's actually an interesting thing for people to consider, the notion of qualifications for coaching teams and where those might fit with developing them going forward.
Yeah, definitely.
So the value of coaching, I'm interested in how you think this fits within the wider context of professional development for teachers, because I think it has lots of different roles and lots of different benefits from my experience. So what did you find, Paul?
Yeah, it's an eclectic mix of ideas really and concepts. We'll come on to those in a bit as well. But in terms of CPD and using coaching as an instructional tool for better performance, it works because you are working alongside somebody else. It's a peer-to-peer approach. There's no hierarchy. And although we still have these massive CPD events and, you know, the sage on the stage type stuff and generic training, it still does exist and it still has its place. I think we are definitely moving into this era of bespoke, differentiated professional development. As I put on the slide there, you know, I've rarely seen anyone become a better teacher just because somebody's told them to do something else.
Yes.
They've got to find out for themselves and they've got to own that practice, and they want somebody to act as a sounding board while they are doing that. Teaching is a very personalised profession, and teachers don't like other people to tell them what works and what doesn't work. And that's part of the challenge of coaching, is just opening up minds, really.
Yes.
Explore other options.
Yes.
Did you know that what you are doing is great, but is there a better way of doing it that's going to make your life easier and be more beneficial to your students? And once you start opening up those conversations, you can really see people thinking about their practice, sometimes for the first time. Think, oh, I'm really challenging myself about what I'm doing in the classroom. And that's a great first step.
More and more, I think that coaching is about trying to engage with the way people think and challenging the thinking and pushing the thinking forward and around and about and underneath things to find new approaches, to find insight, to find alternatives. So I think a lot of my initial work with coaching was around talking and language and models, maybe. And now I'm more interested in how do those things affect thinking, and what can I see about that change in thinking happening, but then affects planning, implementation, resource design, classroom management.
I mean, I get asked, well, you're going to ask me to change my teaching methods is going to create more work for me. And I think a lot of teachers think that if I change, that it's going to mean more work.
Yes.
And I think one of my mantras, and I think like yours, is actually what we want to do is reduce your workload.
Work smarter.
Think about how effective your practice is and how efficient it is. Because at the end of the day, and we'll come on to this again, is a little bit about mental health and well-being moving forward. And it's really supporting teachers to actually think about how they are managing their time. And I think for a lot of teachers in the last few years, that's been a huge eye-opener.
It's absolutely that. And that reflective space, I mean, I think during COVID and since, that reflective space to think about actually what are we finding useful? What are the changes that are happening for learners that we now need to adjust to? All of those conversations and that thinking is really benefiting from work with coaches to help people have that space and to step back and to reflect on those things and start to make choices, as you said, choices that will suit them better, but that will also benefit students. I think it's a really good point that generic CPD has got a place in terms of input, in terms of stimulating ideas in front of people, maybe exposing them to new ways of doing things, but that the coaching is where the deep thinking and the planning and the growth and change tends to happen.
Yeah, it's the bridge between the abstract and the concrete for me. And a lot of generic CPD introduces people to concepts, the awareness of what's out there. So did an awareness program recently, just sort of embedding differentiation in a different way, a teach to the top methodology, rather than looking at trying to develop individual learning plans for particular students. It's teach to the top, get them to reach their potential. And that was a great awareness. And then it was turning that abstract idea into concrete teaching practice. What does that actually mean in the classroom for me as a teacher? And that's when the coaching conversation really takes hold. It's here's the abstract idea, here's the theory, here's the concept, here's the pedagogical term, if you like, but what does it mean in practice? And it's the coaching that turns theory into practice.
Exactly, and allows the individuals to really work on those exciting ideas that they might have seen. And I always feel like that still in the sector, some colleges are quite wedded to the big CPD day, and a lot of their resourcing is going around that time, and money is spent on it, and people's time is used in that way. But actually, those smaller scale conversations, even group coaching teams of people or clusters of teachers, if you can't resource the one-to-one work as much, is so much more powerful for creating actual changes in behaviour and practice than sitting everybody in huge rooms listening to somebody very expensive. So I'm kind of really pro this idea of putting the investment in creating the individual change, because that will ripple through all the classes that those teachers teach.
Yes, absolutely. It's taking ownership You only change your practice when you own that practice, and you feel that you have led the change yourself. It's been your decision, rather than something being done to you.
Such an experiential process when it's done
Yeah.
well, I think. So let's go a bit bigger and think about what you feel coaching's brought to the different organisations where you've worked. What have you seen in terms of benefits and impacts? And this is a really hot topic at the moment because the sector is really interested in, I would say, quite fixated on impact and the notion of, does this make a difference? How do we know?
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Nope.
Impact is so important, and I'm certainly not here today, and you're not here today, so the coaching is this sort of airy fairy thing that sort of floats about an organisation. It's not a fluffy thing, and it's not the easy option. In fact, it's in a way it's more challenging. So first is say, as I've been plain sailing, that the journey of coaching and trying to embed that into the further education sector has been a challenge. Personally, professionally, and it takes a bit of thick skin, lots of knockbacks.
Yes.
But the positive is I've seen probably hundreds of teachers who have reflected on their practice and light bulb moments, and really changed for the better, and turned themselves from what I call hopeful competence. I think I know what I'm doing and I'm giving it a go, and let's hope for the best, to really understanding what they are doing in the classroom, and turning into what I refer to as expert practitioners. You're an expert practitioner when you're reflecting on your practice. There's no such thing as a perfect teacher. But if you reflect on your practice, you will become a better teacher in a sustained way, because we always have to transfer skills into different learning contexts all the time. I might be the perfect teacher teaching that unit for those 3 weeks to that group, but that doesn't mean I'm going to transfer that experience to another teaching context. So yeah, but the real challenge, Joe, is converting those individual wins, those individual gains, into whole college approaches. And we've been on that journey, and I think we're still on that journey, and I'm not going to beat around the bush here. I think, we are still, at the tip of the iceberg of what we can really achieve in the sector. I think we've made fantastic gains. I think AP Connect has been a fantastic tool to generate a national promotion of the value of coaching in our colleges all across the country. And it's those particular initiatives that have become really, really powerful. And we have advanced practitioners and advocates of coaching mentoring in most of our colleges and schools now. And that's great. It's transferring that knowledge into a whole college or whole school approach that is sustainable and is embedded as a natural part of the learning community. And that's the real challenge.
So many interesting things you've said there. I think there's something for me about thinking about understanding what coaching might be able to be, and developing vocabulary in the organisation, skills, ways of working. And that's a skill development and training need, as well as an initial mindset and strategy position you need to take. But there's also something about where does it fit in operations? And increasingly I'm seeing a real challenge in places about, actually, okay, if some people know how to coach, that's fine, but when do they have those opportunities, and where do those conversations take place? In the places where I'm seeing things taking hold best, there's a real look at operations in terms of where those conversations might happen. There might be teacher talk sessions in the college on the timetable. There might be time in team meetings allocated to reflective dialogue using skills. We might have coaching being embedded into PDRs, professional development review, and appraisal conversations, as well as all the one-to-one work and the AP, advanced practitioner work in CPD. So for me, there are so many aspects to this work on pushing it down into culture and making it flourish. For you, which different aspects have you found particularly important in trying to get it to take hold and flourish?
Yeah, I'm going to come on to a model a bit later, which looks at that, how to transform culture. The first point of call is always a buy-in from your senior leadership team. If they don't understand what coaching cultures are all about and coaching communities are all about, then you won't get very far. And it will be an add-on. It will be, oh, that's just something that the fewer staff are into, and let them get on with it. And they can do a little impact report after a year, and then, we'll review it again. We've still got that mentality in a lot of our senior leaders. So they've got lots of pressures, business pressures, financial pressures. We know that. And I think a lot of leaders still find coaching a little bit scary a little
Yes.
bit mystifying, the great unknown. And you talk about impact and say, well, where's the impact? And sometimes it's not in numbers, it's not in pounds and pennies, but you actually see it somewhere down the line. For me, a big impact of coaching is it's personal investment in your staff.
Yes.
And if your staff feel valued,
Yes.
then they will perform better and they will want to give themselves to that organisation. They will become loyal to that conversation because they feel valued.
Yeah.
And I think it's very difficult to measure that. Quite interesting at the moment. We've got a sort of the turnover of staff in a lot of colleges is quite high.
Yes.
Post-pandemic for all sorts of reasons. And I think keeping your staff teams and your really valued members of staff is so important now.
Yes.
And coaching for me is a way of really valuing staff who are thinking about doing other things and saying, actually, we understand, we get it.
Yeah.
You know, it's been a really, really hard 3 years.
It's such a grindingly difficult period.
And you are not alone in how you feel.
Yeah.
And for me, coaching is about building resilience as well in our teaching workforce. And it's difficult to measure, but I think in the long term, it's very cost effective for organisations.
I think I'm completely with you. It's about the professional growth. It's about the respect and valuing of people as employees who are developing as humans in the roles. It's about putting the value on that, putting the resourcing behind that and seeing where that fits in your culture more widely. And I do think that places where I'm working who are looking at impact more insightfully, they're starting to think about staff surveys and how they put questions there to kind of benchmark staff response across time. They're getting feedback from teams about how they're working with coaching, with CPD, about the changes they've made and the effect on their students. They're starting to have the notion of impact review in a richer way that is not just numbers. There are numbers in there, but there's a much bigger conversation, as you rightly said, about the change for people. What's the difference for them if you're in a culture where these conversations are enabled and respected and resourced? I think I'm with you also in saying that it's actually we're at the beginning of this. I think AP Connect, the big project run by the Education and Training Foundation over the last 4 years with Touch Consulting leading, has made a huge difference in bringing that conversation into the bigger sphere, bringing confidence and visibility up on that work. But I totally also agree with you in the fact that leadership can make a fundamental difference as to whether this has oxygen in your organisation or in fact the air's cut off.
Yep.
Some of the senior leaders I see who are really understanding of coaching, value it, they allow space to happen, they create resource in AP teams, they put time on the timetable where people can get together and they realise they need to do that their role is really about structured autonomy, as Matt O'Leary's team talked about in that leadership and learning report from Fettel, creating the space into which other creative work can happen. I think leadership is fundamental for this. With leaders that you've worked in who've been pro and supportive, what kinds of things have they done, Paul, that have been helpful? What have you seen as helpful leadership behaviours?
Yeah, I think it's understanding that you need the time and space.
Yes.
And there is a financial investment into this.
Yes.
And I'm having conversations this week about that financial investment. It's always going to be on the table, but I think it's and I will pick up on this a bit later on when we look at the modelling. But it's a staged process, and it needs embedded planning.
Yes.
And it's what you say. It's got to be a part of what we do in college culture, not something that's just an initiative.
Yes.
Or something that's just an add-on. As I mentioned before, it's not supplementary to what we do. It should be actually what we do.
Yes.
It's who we are. It's how we best function.
Yes.
Especially as teacher workforces. And it's even more important than ever, I think, to actually get this right.
I remember going to a conference. It was a big CPD conference that was beyond education. It was commercial, and there were organisations there talking about embedding coaching, and they were saying, big organisations, people like KPMG, they were saying it's a 7-year journey from starting to think and understand and gradually understand, and then look at strategy, and then looking at skills building, and then looking at operations, and then refining until it becomes a way of thinking and a way of working.
Yes, there's no short-termism shortcuts here.
No.
I know, I agree with that. Actually, I think in the colleges that I've worked in and speaking to colleagues across the country, I think it's a 3-year model.
At least, yes.
At least three, a
yes.
minimum of 3 years to start to embed a culture of coaching and mentoring that's going to make a big difference for the organisation.
So for that, we need leaders who are visionary, who are persistent,
Mm.
who are enabling, and who don't lose focus and attention because something else is more interesting or louder during that time. And that's one of the challenges at that
Oh,
level, I
huge,
think, when there's so
huge
many
challenge,
things which
huge
is
challenge. And, you know,
difficult.
and I speak with senior leaders all the time, as you know, and, you know, they have their remit, they have their scope of responsibility. And unfortunately for the sector, in a way, the financial impairment is as big now than it's ever been.
Yeah, and the constant change and the constant being hit with different things that seem to be really high priority. I mean, this kind of really thorough, rigorous, in-depth, embedded work can sometimes get knocked off the agenda. So I think, yeah, the role of those leaders in creating that space, that structured autonomy into which we can all work with our enthusiasm and our competence and our passion is actually a really important point to make. Okay, thank you for that part of the conversation. We're going to move on in a little moment and we're going to think about embedding coaching in FE and how that works as well.